Welcome to Midnight Rain Tales. The world sleeps, and the rain begins to whisper. In this quiet hour, stories drift through the night air, soft, chilling, unforgettable. Here, under the midnight sky, we share the tales the rain refuses to forget. Stay close and listen. Twin beams carved a path through the obsidian drape of night, snagging abruptly on a shape that defied the mundane geometry of the roadside. Even now, I comprehend the error. Accelerate, windows sealed, music roaring, that was the sane response. It wasn't mine, hence this frantic script, fingers still betraying the tremor born on County Road 41. 6 hours had dissolved behind the monotonous hum of rubber on tarmac, bearing me eastward from Pittsburgh's steel embrace toward the quietude of my Ohio home. The dashboard glowed 11:43 p.m. My eyelids felt scraped raw against eyeballs protesting the relentless dark. My spine groaned from its prolonged confinement within the Odyssey, my aging sedan. Frigid October air pressed against the car's thin shell, a chill the straining heater barely repelled. County Road 41 unspooled ahead, a desolate ribbon slicing through timberland dense and close. No benevolent streetlights punctured this gloom, only the forward thrust of my high beams. Trees loomed, branches interlacing overhead like skeletal fingers poised to grasp. 40 minutes, perhaps more, since another vehicle's lights had offered transient companionship. My hand sought the thermos, finding only hollow plastic. A desert bloomed in my throat. The radio, a fickle companion in these hinterlands, offered mostly a crackling void, static, overwhelming faint whispers of melody. I silenced it. The world shrank to the drone of the engine, the rhythmic slap of tires on worn asphalt. And then I registered it, an upright form upon the gravel verge, perhaps 50 yards distant. My headlights washed over it as the road took a gentle bend. Initially, the impression was human, 6 feet tall, clad in something dark. Yet an intrinsic wrongness clung to its posture, a stillness profound, unnatural, less like a living being than a stark photograph dropped into the landscape. My foot eased from the accelerator, a reflex preceding conscious decision. Stranded travelers weren't unheard of out here. 60 miles per hour bled to 40. The shape swelled in the windscreen, 30, 20. Clarity refused to coalesce with proximity. The headlights struck it full on now. Barely 20 feet separated us. I was inching past at 15 miles per hour. The figure remained utterly immobile. A dark coat, perhaps, fell to its knees, yet the fabric hung inert, defying the breeze that stirred the roadside grasses. Its arms dangled impossibly long, fingertips hovering near where shins should be. But the face was the epicenter of the wrongness, the catalyst that turned my blood to ice water and locked my hands onto the steering wheel. It possessed none, where features should have been. Eyes, nose, mouth. There existed only pure negation, not shadow, not the concealment of a hood or mask, but an utter lacuna, as if reality itself had been selectively erased. Light struck the clothing, delineated the rough shape of a head, yet that central void drank the illumination, leaving nothing. The brake pedal met the floor. The Odyssey slowed to a near standstill. Every nerve ending shrieked, flee, demanded I stomp the gas, escape this violation of sense. Yet a dreadful fascination held me captive. Less than 10 feet now separated my window from the anomaly. It didn't stir, offered no acknowledgement of my presence, merely stood oriented toward the road ahead, presenting that horrific nullity where a face belonged. Tremors seized my hands. Sweat traced cold paths down my spine, despite the enveloping chill. The idling engine seemed obscenely loud in the sudden vast silence. I couldn't sever my gaze from it. The void seemed to throb, to deepen, a well of absolute nothing threatening to pull me in. Then it shifted, not with the fluid grace of muscle and bone. It jumped, a glitch in the fabric of the moment, one instant facing the road. The next, its entire form rotated 90 degrees, confronting my car directly. No turn, no pivot, no foot movement, just instantaneous reorientation. A scream gathered, tight and painful, in my throat. My foot found the accelerator, slamming it to the floorboard. The engine screamed in protest. The car surged forward. A glance in the side mirror confirmed the impossible. Another stuttering shift. It now occupied the center of the road behind me. My taillights painted it crimson. That faceless head canted at an angle no human spine could endure. Velocity climbed. 60, 70. The engine strained, whining its objection. Trees blurred into streaks of darkness. In the rear view, the figure diminished, yet remained steadfast in the road's center, still oriented toward my frantic retreat. My grip on the wheel was a trembling vice. Keeping the car true felt Herculean. The road coiled through the forest. I took the curves with reckless abandon, tires complaining shrilly. Each mirror check revealed only empty asphalt receding into blackness. Perhaps 5 minutes of this desperate flight passed before coherent breath returned. My knuckles relaxed fractionally on the wheel. Whatever abomination that was, it lay behind me. The mirror reflected only night. I permitted the speed to drop to something less suicidal, conscious of the tree's unforgiving proximity. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The clock showed 11:52 p.m. 9 minutes. An eternity had unfolded in 9 minutes. The radio exploded into life, startling a yelp from me. Static erupted, a furious blizzard of sound from speakers I knew I had silenced. My finger stabbed the power button. The static persisted, intensifying. Dashboard lights flickered erratically. Compelled, I looked up into the rearview mirror again. It occupied the back seat. The scream tore free this time, raw and unrestrained. The car slewed violently as my arms spasmed. I wrestled for control, tires breaking traction, skidding on the tarmac. Through the chaos, the thing sat placidly, that featureless void aimed squarely at the back of my skull. A savage wrench of the wheel sent the Odyssey into a spin. Brakes shrieked. Once, twice, the world whirled outside the windows before the car shuddered to a halt, facing the direction from which I'd come. No thought, no plan, only pure primal instinct. I flung the driver's door open, hurling myself out onto the cold road surface. I ran. The woods beckoned, a wall of deeper darkness promising concealment. But as my feet hit the gravel shoulder, the folly struck me. It was behind me, somewhere in that impenetrable black, and I was weaponless, lightless, blind. Only the car's headlights offered sanctuary, casting elongated, dancing shadows amongst the trees. I spun, backing away from the vehicle. The rear seat appeared vacant now. The static still screamed from the radio, a physical pressure in the night stillness. A flicker of motion snagged my peripheral vision. It materialized beside the vehicle's rear fender. No approach, no footsteps. It was simply there. That blank oval swiveled toward me. The arms, those grotesque appendages, hung low, fingers nearly scraping the ground. I retreated faster, stumbling on the uneven terrain. The figure jerked forward, not walking, not traversing the space between us, but replacing itself, appearing yards closer with each fractured stop-motion lurch. It was like viewing a slideshow of an approach with all the transitional frames excised. My back struck rough bark, a tree. The figure stood 10 feet away. The radio shrieked an electronic banshee wail, climbing in pitch until it felt like needles in my ears. The headlights began to flicker violently, painting the scene in stark, terrifying, stroboscopic relief. The thing's head tilted again, impossibly far, nearly horizontal to its shoulders. That void face remained locked on me. The static achieved a piercing, unbearable crescendo. I clamped my hands over my ears, squeezed my eyes shut. My legs buckled. I slid down the trunk, crumpling onto the damp earth. The sound bored directly into my skull, bypassing my defenses. The strobing light pulsed against my closed eyelids. Then, abruptly, silence. I remained huddled, trembling, eyes clamped shut. Nothing. Only my own ragged gasps and the muted nocturnal chorus of the forest. No light assaulted my eyelids beyond the steady, unwavering beams of my car's headlights. Tentatively, I opened my eyes. The road was clear. My Odyssey sat angled across the lanes, engine humming, driver's door agape. No figure, no static, just the chirr of crickets and a soft breeze whispering through the leaves. Minutes passed while I remained pressed against the tree, scanning the tree line, waiting for its reappearance. It did not come. Gradually, my breathing steadied. Strength returned to my limbs. I approached the car with extreme caution, poised for flight should that featureless visage manifest once more. Nothing stirred but shadows animated by the wind playing with the headlight beams. The radio was off, though I hadn't touched it. The back seat was undeniably empty. I slid behind the wheel, slammed the door, thumbed the lock. My hands remained unsteady as I wrestled the gear shift into drive. Turning the car around, I drove, checking every mirror with obsessive regularity, pushing the speed limit far beyond reason on the winding road. The remaining 2 hours home were a gauntlet of imagined horrors. Every roadside shadow pulsed with potential menace. Every burst of stray radio interference sent jolts of adrenaline through me. But the figure did not reappear. Pre-dawn gray had begun to dilute the eastern sky when I finally coasted into my driveway. I sat for a long while, engine silenced, staring blankly ahead. My mind scrabbled for rational explanations. Exhaustion, stress, a waking nightmare induced by caffeine and sleep deprivation. Yet the image remained indelible. The absence where a face should be, the impossible, stuttering locomotion, the pervasive wrongness of its existence. It was etched into my memory with chilling precision. I went inside, securing every lock, drawing every curtain. I watched the sun climb from the living room armchair, sleep an impossibility. I called in sick, spent the day oscillating between terror and desperate self-reassurance. It wasn't real. It couldn't be. But last night, precisely 24 hours after that roadside encounter, my radio switched itself on, static at first, then woven beneath the white noise. Another sound emerged, breathing but distorted, wet, labored, seeming to emanate from the very air around me. I scrambled to check the windows, and there it stood, on my front lawn, that blank void turned upward toward my window. As I watched, paralyzed, it jerked closer to the house, closer, closer. I write this now from the dubious sanctuary of my bedroom closet. The static intensifies, the breathing rasps louder. I hear it navigating my home, those fractured, impossible movements drawing nearer. It's outside my bedroom door, the handle is turning. Its motives remain opaque. Why it fixated on me, unknown. But this I know with chilling certainty. Should you find yourself driving through the lonely hours and perceive a figure standing sentinel by the road, do not hesitate, do not investigate, drive. Drive like hell itself is clawing at your bumper, and offer a prayer it failed to notice you at all. The closet door is opening. Midnight found me adrift in the living room's low amber glow, most lamps extinguished in anticipation of sleep. Outside, an absolute stillness reigned. No distant engines, no murmuring voices, a profound hush I typically welcomed. Yet this particular silence felt wrong, taut. Then slicing through it came a rhythm from overhead, a dull, scraping insistence. Thump, scrape, pause, thump, scrape, pause. It resonated from the ceiling, from the forgotten territory of the attic. Years had passed since the attic last crossed my mind, a space utterly unused. Its portal, a square hatch high at the corridor's terminus, loomed above the folded stepladder, leaning sentinel against the plaster. Ascending felt alien, an unnecessary violation of dormant dust and presumed emptiness. But the sound persisted, a metronome of unease. I tried dismissal, anchoring myself to the sofa's armrest, attributing the disturbance to the house's old bones settling or some nocturnal creature's passage. The cadence, however, defied randomness. Tap, scrape, silence, with unnerving regularity. 5 minutes stretched into an eternity of this measured disruption until inaction became intolerable. Flicking on the hallway's stark bulb, I confronted the hatch. A simple stool granted me the necessary height. Positioned directly below, I strained upwards. The panel resisted, sealed by years of paint accretion around its seams. A forceful shove finally broke the seal. The wood groaned upwards, releasing a descending wave of ancient air. Parched, stagnant, acrid enough to sting my eyes and provoke a dry cough into the back of my hand. A light source seemed prudent. Retreating to the closet, I retrieved the emergency LED torch, confirming its potent beam against my palm. Fresh batteries ensured its strength. From the kitchen, a paper dust mask prompted by the acrid air that still lingered. An old canvas jacket and thick work gloves followed, armor against the unknown. Thus equipped, I returned to the waiting aperture, ascended the stool once more, and projected my head into the darkness above. My flashlight carved a sharp cone through an expanse far greater than anticipated. This wasn't some cramped crawl space. It possessed an unexpected vastness. Ancient floorboards, visibly gapped and fissured, stretched before me. No clutter, no forgotten boxes marred the immediate view. Hoisting myself fully inside, I tested the timbers gingerly before standing upright. The beam swept across the perimeter, illuminating ranks of skeletal wooden shelves lining the walls. Every single one stood vacant, their pale surfaces scoured smooth, as if by ceaseless friction over decades. Then, in a far corner, my light snagged on them. Masks, 3 of them, propped against the juncture of floor and wall in a neat row. They were crudely fashioned from wood, primitive faces marked only by narrow slits for mouths and shallow decorative grooves where eyes should have been. Their eyelessness rendered them disturbingly blank. Drawn closer, my light exploring their coarse texture, I caught only the scent of desiccated timber and settled dust. No windows pierced these attic walls. Illumination came solely from my torch and something else, an anomaly. Towards the room's center, the air itself seemed to hold a diffuse silvery luminescence, mimicking moonlight filtering through non-existent fissures. My beam traced the ceiling. Solid timber, no vents, no skylights, yet patches of the floor shimmered faintly. Impossible, I knew. The roof above was sound. Still, this phantom glow persisted, subtly outlining shapes beyond my flashlight's reach. Just as I registered this impossibility, the rhythmic scraping ceased. Silence pressed in, only to be broken by a new sound, a soft, dry susurrus like heavy cloth drawn over rough wood. And then the whispering began. It emanated from behind a distant shelf, a low, indistinct confluence of voices. Treading carefully, suppressing the crunch of dust underfoot, I edged closer. The murmuring coalesced slightly, hushed, overlapping tones. Amidst the unintelligible tide, one word snagged my attention. Ilara, my name. They spoke of me. Ice formed in my veins. My pulse hammered against my ribs. My gloved palms grew damp. I swept the flashlight's beam towards the source of the whispers. Nothing. Just an empty shelf, bare wall beyond. Yet the susurration persisted, weaving my name, Ilara, through its fabric in shifting cadences. One voice, a low baritone, uttered it with deliberate care. Another, thin and sharp, spat it out with frantic energy. Speechless, motionless, I listened. Nothing visible stirred, but the very atmosphere shifted, growing dense, pressing against my skin. My breath hitched. A primal urge to flee warred with a desperate curiosity. I retreated a single step. A floorboard groaned beneath my weight. The whispering paused, then surged back, amplified. Fragments became clearer. Contention, disagreement, a command to hush, an observation, sharp with discovery. She's here. She came up. Determined to locate the source, I began a cautious circuit of the space, flashlight beam preceding me. Peering behind shelves revealed only dust-laden corners and voids. No wires, no vents, no concealed speakers. My gaze swung back to the corner with the masks. A subtle wrongness registered. Their alignment had shifted. Previously side by side, facing outwards, the central mask was now canted slightly, angled towards its neighbor. Kneeling, I bathed it in light. My gloved fingers brushed the wood, cool, dry. No draft explained the change. The air hung utterly motionless, yet not entirely still. A bizarre perception arose. The attic breathed, not metaphorically. The floor beneath my feet seemed to possess a slow, subtle rhythm, an almost imperceptible rise and fall, like the respiration of some colossal entity. A faint vibration traveled through my boots. Bracing myself, I pressed a hand flat against the boards. Solid timber, yet undeniably imbued with this gentle, rhythmic undulation. Disquiet curdled within me. The implications were unthinkable. A sudden grating sound scraped behind me. I whirled, flashlight thrust forward defensively. There, huddled low in the angle of the walls, was a silhouette, a concentration of shadow deeper than the ambient gloom, hunched as if in concealment, motionless, featureless in the dimness. Its outline suggested a human form, yet remained disturbingly vague, still, silent. My throat constricted as I considered speaking. Before words could form, the insidious whispering arose from a different corner. Pivoting, my light found another crouched form, and another. Realization dawned. They occupied multiple corners, pressed low against the wood, indistinct figures barely resolved in the peculiar, sourceless light. 3, perhaps 4. They maintained their distance, static observers. The whispering ebbed and flowed around me, again weaving my name, Alara, into its disquieting chorus. "Who are you?" The question ripped from my throat, unnaturally loud in the charged stillness. The whispering continued unabated, a self-contained colloquy. The shapes offered no reply, no acknowledgement. Their voices possessed a human timbre, yet their forms remained faceless, eyeless, mouthless. Retreat, the thought screamed. I took a step towards where the entrance should be, then spun back, seeking the square of dimly lit hallway below. It wasn't there. My light frantically traced the ceiling, the floor. Only unbroken timbers met my gaze. The hatch had vanished. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through me. My breath came in ragged gasps, heart battering my ribs. A clammy sheen broke out on my forehead, slicked the small of my back. "Calm down," I commanded myself, the words a useless mantra against the rising tide of fear. Retracing my path towards the shelves, each footfall punctuated by the groaning floorboards, I scrutinized the walls. Here, this was the spot. The ladder should have descended into the hallway below. Instead, solid planks stretched across the floor, meeting an uninterrupted wall. My hand pressed against the unyielding wood. Real, solid. I strained my ears, listening for any familiar sound from my home. The refrigerator's drone, the clock's measured tick. Silence. Only the ceaseless whispering and that dry, rustling friction filled the void. Trapped. The realization settled heavily. What options remained? A systematic check of the corners, perhaps. Moving with deliberate slowness, flashlight beam held steady, I approached the nearest huddled form. As my light neared, the shape simply dissolved, melting back into the deeper shadows without sound or discernible movement. It didn't retreat. It ceased to be. Reaching the corner, I found only thick dust that tickled my nose, provoking a sneeze that stung my dry eyes. The next corner yielded the same result. The shape receded into nothingness upon my approach. Too swift, too ethereal to be properly illuminated. Yet the whispers persisted, swirling around me, seeming always to emanate from just behind whichever way I turned. Another attempt at communication. "Alara," I stated, my voice trembling slightly. "I live downstairs. What do you want?" The murmuring council continued its internal debate, ignoring my plea. My name echoed back, drawn out, distorted. Contradictory phrases surfaced. "Shouldn't be here. She belongs." They argued, disagreed. My jaw clenched, fingers whitening around the flashlight's casing, shaking. Perhaps the masks held a key. Returning to their corner, I found them altered again. All three now faced inwards, a silent, eyeless conference. Kneeling, I lifted one. Turning it over revealed a network of shallow, random scratch marks scoring the inner surface. Tracing them with a gloved finger, they felt unnervingly fresh. As I replaced the mask, the floor beneath my knees felt strangely yielding, like punky, damp wood, though it remained dry to the touch. It held my weight, but hinted at a precarious softness just beneath the surface. I resisted the urge to press down. Drawing a ragged breath, I forced myself to think. Escape. How? Standing tall, I swept the light in a slow circle. Uniform emptiness greeted me. Bare shelves, floor-bound masks, tenebrous corners. The whispers eddied, sometimes a layered chorus, sometimes punctuated by phantom footfalls just over my shoulder that vanished when I turned. I tested the structure. Pushing against a shelf yielded only a protesting creak. Kneeling, I tried prying at a floorboard. It remained stubbornly fixed. Rapping my knuckles against the walls elicited only solid thuds, yet the whispers intensified with each impact, a chorus of disapproval at my disturbance. Minutes passed in this fruitless survey. Then something overhead caught my eye. A subtle flex in the ceiling timbers, a minute displacement creating a hairline fracture. Through it, a sliver of that impossible silvery light pierced the gloom. Hope, fragile but fierce, flared. Positioning myself beneath it, I looked up. No fixture, no vent, just wood that seemed thinner here. Reaching up, I pressed a palm against it. The timber yielded slightly, strangely pliable. I pushed harder. A sharp crack echoed, and the whispering instantly sharpened, turning agitated, frantic. Ilara, my name, louder now, laced with alarm. Ignoring it, I shoved again with all my strength. Wood splintered, a cascade of fine dust rained down, forcing me to cough and shield my eyes. I wouldn't stop. I needed out. Arms shaking with exertion, I clawed at the crack, widening it, splinter by splinter. The whispers degraded into a sibilant hissing. Behind me, I heard a dry skittering across the floorboards. The shapes moving now. I refused to look. Clamping the flashlight between my teeth, I attacked the weakened wood with both hands, pulling, tearing, heedless of the rough edges biting into my gloved fingers. Finally, a small plank gave way, completely torn loose. A tendril of genuinely cool air streamed through the gap, carrying the faint, damp scent of the night outside. Relief surged. I redoubled my efforts, yanking at the adjacent wood, uncaring of the destruction, focused only on escape. Another board ripped free amid a shower of debris. Spitting the flashlight back into my hand, I peered through the ragged hole. Darkness beckoned, but it was a different quality of dark, less oppressive than the attic's pervasive gloom. Reaching up, I found purchase on the edge and pulled. The hissing below intensified for a moment, then abruptly cut out. Silence. As I levered my upper body through the opening, an ephemeral touch brushed my dangling leg. A convulsive kick met only empty air. Scrabbling, I forced the rest of my body through the gap, driven by the certainty that anywhere was better than there. I found myself in a tight, interstitial space. Beams, insulation, the familiar anatomy of roof construction. This felt real, mundane. Crawling carefully along the joists, mindful of the fragile plaster ceiling below, my flashlight beam soon revealed another aperture a short distance away. It opened downwards, Peering through, relief washed over me in a dizzying wave. The top shelf of my own bedroom closet. Easing myself towards it, I lowered my legs, felt my feet find purchase, and dropped onto the soft welcome of carpet. The faint, clean scent of laundry detergent from the stacked clothes filled my nostrils. Home. Turning, I shone the light back up. The closet ceiling showed only standard construction, perhaps one slightly loose board, nothing more. No gaping hole, no passage to the impossible space I'd fled. Reaching up, my fingers met solid, securely nailed timbers. Catching my breath took conscious effort, my heart still hammering against my sternum. Dust coated my clothes, a fine gray film. My hands, still gloved, trembled uncontrollably. I clicked off the flashlight. The familiar sounds of my house enveloped me. The low thrum of the refrigerator, the hallway clock's steady beat. No whispers disturbed the peace. Emerging from the closet, I surveyed the hallway. High above, the attic hatch sat closed, undisturbed, exactly as it always was. Touching its surface revealed only cool, resistant wood. I stood there for long moments, deliberately slowing my breathing, coaxing my pulse back towards normality. What was that? The dust on my gloves, carrying the faint, acrid scent of that other place, offered tangible proof. In the bathroom, I stripped off the gloves and jacket, washing my hands vigorously, watching the gray residue swirl down the drain. Back in the hallway, everything appeared utterly mundane. I switched on every light downstairs, banishing shadows, searching each room. Nothing amiss. The scraping sound never returned. The attic hatch remained sealed, its secrets inviolate. I lacked any courage or desire to challenge it again. Sleep was impossible that night. I sat vigil in the brightly lit living room, straining against the silence, but heard only the house's normal nocturnal sighs. It felt like my home once more, yet the memory remains vivid, indelible. The vast emptiness, the eyeless masks staring sightlessly, the sibilant chorus weaving my name, the hunched silhouettes lurking in the periphery. I recall the visceral terror, the frantic pulse, the cold sweat, the seizing muscles, the breath catching sharp in my throat upon finding the exit gone. Its reality was absolute. No answers were offered, none found. I ascended into that space, and somehow I descended. Nothing followed, nothing recurred. The attic keeps its silence. I tell myself it was hallucination, a waking nightmare born of solitude and shadow. But the dust was real, the fear was real, and every glance towards the ceiling carries the weight of that remembered impossibility. That circle of sealed earth in the far corner of the yard, it shouldn't have mattered. A relic, my grandfather Silas had called it, choked with dust for half a century when I inherited the old house and its whispering fields. Just a forgotten hazard beneath planks scabbed over with rust. Yet weeks after settling into the inherited solitude, its silence began to pull at me. A quiet insistence weaving itself into the fabric of my waking hours. One sun-drenched, windless afternoon, the pull became irresistible. My toolbox felt heavy, a strange accomplice as I crossed the lawn. The air hung still, thick with the scent of uncut grass and dry soil. Crouching over the well's blind eye, I attacked the ancient nails with a pry bar. Wood groaned in protest, releasing ghosts of dust that danced in the stark light. Sweat slicked my palms. A nervous glance confirmed my solitude. only undulating fields and skeletal trees for witnesses beneath the vast, indifferent sky. Far off, a dog's bark punctuated the quiet, unseen. When the final plank surrendered, splintering slightly, I braced for sheer, empty darkness. Instead, a sound arrested me, the rhythmic plink, plink of water, impossibly distant, impossibly present. I held my breath, listening. Silas swore it dry, a memory echoed by local lore. But the dripping persisted, steady, metronomic, conjuring images of a hidden spring feeding a secret pool. Leaning cautiously, I peered into the gullet, seeking a telltale glint. Only velvet blackness stared back. Rising, I wiped my gritty hands on my trousers, inhaling deeply. A sudden impulse. Test the depth, the echo. I found a fist-sized stone near the overgrown border, its surface cool against my skin. I tossed it into the void. It struck the stone lining twice, sharp raps diminishing as they fell, then a soft, definitive plosh. Water, undeniably. How? A shiver traced its way up my spine. Then came the urge, illogical but potent, to hear my own voice returned from that depth. I leaned over the aperture, cupped my hands, and shouted, "Hello!" The sound plunged, then returned, warped, as if strained through something thick and cold. Not my voice, not truly, a guttural mimicry, lower, fragmented. It made my skin crawl, my heart hammer against my ribs. Had something else answered simultaneously? A sibilant breath beneath the echo, words almost forming. I pulled back sharply, a strange tingling prickling my forearms. Every instinct screamed to cover it, walk away, forget. But curiosity, now barbed with unease, held me fast. Minutes passed, marked only by the ceaseless drip and the sigh of wind through the tall grass behind me. Eventually, wrestling with a nameless dread, I replaced the boards, hammering a few nails home with unsteady hands before retreating indoors. The well's dark presence imprinted on my mind. I spoke of it to no one, feeling foolish, yet profoundly disturbed by the phantom voices. Sleep became a battleground that night. The image of the open well, a dark mouth in the earth, flared behind my closed eyelids. Midnight found me stark awake, ceiling gazing, switching on the bedside lamp, hoping ink on paper might anchor me. My gaze snagged on the window overlooking the backyard. The well lay shrouded in shadow, yet I felt its location like a physical pressure. I tried to read, but the words blurred, my attention repeatedly drawn to the dark pane. Sleep, when it finally came, offered no respite, only uneasy dreams. Standing at the precipice, peering down as a low whisper coiled up from the blackness. "Come down." I woke slick with sweat, heart pounding. The following days unfurled in a semblance of normalcy. House chores, repairs, tending the neglected garden, mundane tasks meant to occupy hands and mind. But the well remained, an invisible lodestone. I'd find myself paused by the kitchen window, staring at the weathered planks, hands trembling slightly, mouth dry. It felt like a summons, an irrational certainty that the well was aware, waiting. Madness, I told myself, an overactive imagination sparked by a peculiar echo. Yet the feeling persisted, tightening its grip. Nights worsened. The dream whispers gained clarity, sometimes multiplying into a chorus of indistinct voices. Visions flickered, damp, sweating stone, the slow ooze of water down ancient walls. In these dreams, a profound chill seeped into my bones. the clammy embrace of a subterranean place. Waking left me exhausted, unrested, breath catching in my chest, the echo of phantom voices lingering in the quiet room. After nearly a week besieged by this growing unease, I resolved to confront it, to banish the phantoms with cold reality. Early afternoon, sun high and bright, lent a fragile confidence. Armed with a heavy-duty flashlight from the garage, I returned to the well. The boards came away more easily this time, as if expecting me. Crouching, heart thudding a nervous rhythm, I leaned over the edge and switched on the beam. It stabbed into the darkness, revealing aged stone walls descending into gloom. Perhaps 20 feet below, a surface shimmered, water, disturbed by tiny movements reflecting the light back as wavering patterns. My throat constricted. Decades dry, Silas had said. Decades. I called out again, hello, desperate for a normal, clean echo. My voice fell, clear and loud, but returned fractured, dissolving into discordant fragments. And then silence, followed by a definite whisper, a brief susurration of sound like dry leaves skittering across stone. My stomach clenched. I scrambled upright, switched off the light, backed away. The boards felt flimsy, inadequate as I hammered them down once more. Inside, I scrubbed my hands at the sink, the chill on my back impervious to the warm water. Pacing the living room, I debated telling someone, the county office, a well specialist, but the fear of dismissal, of being labeled fanciful, kept me silent. That night delivered the most terrifying dream yet. I was descending somehow down slimy, unseen steps within the well shaft, each step precarious. My flashlight beam sputtered, casting wild shadows. The dripping amplified, echoing relentlessly, cold intensified with depth. Then the voice, clearer than ever. Keep coming, you're close. Panic surged, a drowning wave, yet my feet continued their downward march beyond my control. I woke with a gasp, tangled in sweat-drenched sheets, heart threatening to batter its way out of my chest. In the bathroom mirror, my reflection was gaunt, eyes shadowed, hands trembling as I splashed water on my face. I threw myself into daytime distractions, paint in hallways, clearing the garage, battling the insidious pull towards the backyard. But the nights offered no escape. The dreams persisted, the voices insistent, speaking faster now, incomprehensible but radiating a palpable pressure. I started forcing myself awake with late-night coffee, dreading the inevitable drift into that subterranean darkness. The feeling of being drawn intensified. Twice I found myself standing by the back door, hand on the knob, with no memory of getting out of bed. The cool metal a shock against my palm. A creeping somnambulistic dread took hold. I began locking the door religiously, even wedging a chair beneath the handle. One dawn, I discovered them. Muddy footprints, my own boot size, leading from the threshold across the kitchen floor. I must have gone out, stood there, listened. The realization struck me cold. Control was slipping. Cleaning the tracks, my hands shook, dizziness washing over me, the phantom dripping, echoing inside my skull. Later that day, a decision crystallized, born of desperation. I would descend. Not far, just enough to see, to understand. Rope, a brighter flashlight, the old climbing harness unearthed from garage rafters. Tools for an answer. I needed to know if there was a passage, a chamber, anything to explain the voices, or if my mind was truly fracturing. I'd be careful, I promised myself, just a look. Even as I prepared, dread coiled in my gut. My palms grew slick, handling the sturdy rope. My heart raced at the thought of willingly crossing that threshold. But the well's grip was absolute. I had to break it or be broken. Evening approached, the sun angling to cast the longest possible light into the shaft. I anchored the rope securely around a thick, immovable iron post cemented near the garden shed, testing knots, cinching the harness tight. The boards came off again, releasing a puff of cool, damp air that smelled of earth and stillness. Flashlight clipped to my harness, freeing my hands. I took a ragged breath, knelt, and swung my legs over the lip. The stone, cold and weeping, scraped against my boots. Hand over hand, I lowered myself into the narrowing dark, the rope sliding smoothly. My flashlight beam, a fragile sword, sliced into the gloom, illuminating walls slick with moisture and patches of pallid moss. Water trickled in runnels down the ancient stone, the sound magnified, omnipresent. The harness creaked. My breathing was shallow, rapid. 5 feet, 10. Daylight dwindled above. The darkness below deepened, thickened. I could clearly see the water's surface now, perhaps another 10 feet down, a black, placid mirror reflecting my wavering light. I paused, dangling, clinging to the rope. My flashlight flickered, momentarily dimming, and raw panic jolted through me. The whispering returned, faint, insidious, like murmurs just beyond hearing. I twisted, scanning the enclosing walls, nearly losing my footing on the slick stone. Nothing. Solid, unyielding rock, my pulse hammered in my ears. I hung there, suspended between the known world and the abyss, debating retreat. No ledge, no tunnel, just the uniform curve of the well. Perhaps it was exhaustion, sleep deprivation, the echo of my own breath. Then a faint vibration hummed up the rope, a distinct tremor from below, as if something had brushed against it. My heart leaped. I swallowed, steadied myself, peered down. The water rippled, concentric circles spreading outward from the center. In that same instant, the whisper came again, loud now, shockingly close, intimate as a lover, cold as the grave. Warm breath ghosting against my neck. Don't stop. A strangled cry escaped me. I scrambled upwards, hands burning on the rope, clumsy with terror. My foot slipped, my knee slammed against the unforgiving stone, sending lancing pain up my thigh. Gritting my teeth, I hauled myself higher, lungs searing, pulling frantically against gravity. Reaching the top, I clawed my way out, collapsing onto the blessed solidity of the grass, gasping. My hands were raw, my knee pulsed with agony. My heart felt bruised, battered against my ribs. I lay there for long moments, just breathing, listening. The whispers echoed only in my head now. Outside, the world remained stubbornly normal. High sun, warm air, bird song. After the shaking subsided, I dragged myself up, retrieved the planks, and hammered them back with violent finality, adding a heavy concrete block scavenged from the side of the house for good measure. Limping back inside, I locked the door, slumping at the kitchen table, muscles trembling, knee throbbing, utterly drained. Sleep is now impossible. Closing my eyes invites the suffocating darkness, the phantom breath on my neck. My body remembers the fall, the whispers. I pace the floors, check the locked back door incessantly, stare out at the moonlit yard where the concrete block squats over the sealed well, a tombstone on my sanity. Every night the pull returns. It begins subtly, a tingling that spreads up my arms. Then the familiar tightening in my chest, the quickening breath, a visceral sensation, like an invisible line cast from the depths, tugging gently, insistently, reeling me towards the backyard. I fight it with music, with light, with sheer, exhausting effort, but it grows stronger. The whispers are no longer confined to dreams or the well's edge. They bleed into the quiet moments of my waking hours, insidious suggestions to return, to uncover, to descend further. Are they real? Am I breaking apart? I don't know. I only know they are calling, relentless, patient, and I fear I cannot resist them much longer. Time had forgotten this hollow, or perhaps deliberately bypassed it, leaving behind a tableau that jarred the senses. Yet, as I drew nearer, a primal dissonance hummed beneath my skin. Something here resonated with profound wrongness. For days I, Silas, a devotee of wilderness solitude, had threaded my way through the primeval forests of the Pacific Northwest, immersed in their raw cathedral grandeur. I believed myself seasoned, familiar with the wild's myriad faces, but the encounter awaiting me that afternoon transcended all expectation. The path, once a discernible ribbon, had dissolved into a mere suggestion beneath layers of pine duff and decaying leaves. Doubt began to coil. Had I wandered irrevocably from the marked ways? Then a flicker through the dense tapestry of green. Smoke, attenuated tendrils spiraling skyward. Hope surged. A ranger's outpost, perhaps? Or a hidden camp? Directions at the very least. Parting a heavy curtain of emerald ferns, I emerged onto the cusp of a small clearing, and the sight froze me mid-stride. A village lay nestled there, utterly alien to the modern age. Rough-hewn dwellings of log and sod, huddled like supplicants around a pulsing heart of flame. Figures moved with quiet purpose, clad in coarse homespun attire redolent of centuries past. Children darted in play, their laughter echoing strangely, while women stirred pots over crackling fires and men plied primitive implements. A fleeting thought, some elaborate historical reenactment. But no markers, no interpretive signs marred the scene's stark authenticity. This was no performance, it was a living relic, impossibly preserved. Awe wrestled with apprehension. As a dilettante chronicler of forgotten ways, this discovery felt like unearthing a myth. A pocket of humanity untouched, sequestered deep within the familiar contours of America. Unbelievable. Stepping fully into the clearing, I raised a hand. Hello? My voice sounded thin, inadequate. I seemed to have lost my way. Could anyone offer assistance? The reaction was instantaneous, chilling. A collective stillness descended, the air thickening as if snagged on my sudden presence. Dozens of eyes, unnervingly alike, pivoted, pinning me in their unified gaze. The murmur of life ceased, leaving only the spit and crackle of the fires to score the sudden, profound silence. A man detached himself from the assembly, etched by wind and seasons, lean as a winter wolf. He approached. His gaze, the startling clarity of ice-locked water, seemed to pierce beyond flesh. "Welcome, wanderer," he rasped, a voice like stones grinding in a dry creek bed. "You have strayed far from the common track." I offered my name, Silas, sketching the tale of my trek, my unintended detour. Even as I spoke, I felt the pressure of the gathering villagers, their focus intense, laced with an unnerving curiosity that felt disturbingly anticipatory. A strange avidity flickered in their depths, unsettling and hard to define. "You carry the weariness of your journey," the man stated. He named himself Corbin, the community's elder. "Come, take your ease amongst us. Eat, rest. When the sun returns, we will speak of guiding you back to your world." My world. The turn of phrase snagged peculiar, but exhaustion and hunger dulled my suspicion. I followed Corbin toward one of the larger structures, acutely conscious of the unwavering scrutiny trailing my every step. Inside, more villagers awaited. They drank in my descriptions of metal birds that traversed the heavens and slabs of talking glass, held in the hand, their eyes wide with an almost unnerving reverence, like acolytes hearing prophecy. As twilight deepened into true night, they offered sustenance, a thick, savory stew that warmed my core and weighted my eyelids. Corbin gestured me toward a small, isolated hut for sleep, murmuring assurances of finding my way home come morning. Elation at my extraordinary find should have filled me, yet lying on the rough pallet, a cold tendril of dread tightened in my gut. An indefinable wrongness clung to this place, to these people. Their fixed stares, their archaic phrasing, the sheer implausibility of their hidden existence. The pieces refused to cohere. Sleep offered little respite, fragmented by visions of shadowed woods and watchful eyes. I jolted awake in the deep gloom preceding dawn, heart hammering. A subtle shift, a sound, a presence had pierced my slumber. I was not alone. A silhouette stood framed in the hut's entrance, stark against the faint exterior light. I recognized her, one of the younger women, Ilara, scarcely more than a girl. "You must go," she breathed, a sibilant rush of air fraught with terror. "Now, before the others stir." I pushed myself upright, senses instantly sharp. "Go! Why? What's happening?" Her head darted nervously toward the sleeping village. "This place, it is not what it seems. We are not what you imagine. Flee before it is too late." Ice traced its way down my spine. "What do you mean? What is this place?" "No time," she hissed, urgent. "Run east, follow the dawn. Do not falter. Do not look behind you. If you hear your name called on the wind, pay it no heed. Run." Before another question could form, she dissolved back into the pre-dawn shadows, ephemeral as smoke. My thoughts whirled, yet primal instinct screamed agreement with her warning. Snatching my pack, I slipped from the hut. The village lay quiescent, fires reduced to sullen embers. A deceptive tranquility hung heavy, thick with unspoken menace. I reached the clearing's edge when the sound began, a low, keening ululation that froze the marrow in my bones. It was answered by another, then a chorus, weaving a tapestry of sound, both sorrowful and utterly predatory. They knew. I ran. Whipping branches scored my face as I plunged into the undergrowth, lungs burning, breath tearing raggedly. Behind me, the cries pursued, drawing nearer, imbued with an unnatural speed, an eerie liquid grace that mocked my clumsy flight. The first tentative fingers of sunlight were infiltrating the canopy when I burst from the tree line onto a scree-laden slope. I scrambled upward, loose rock skittering beneath my boots. Reach the summit, perhaps a road, a landmark, anything signifying the world I knew. Halfway ascended, a grip like iron clamped around my ankle. I kicked backward violently, connecting with yielding flesh. A guttural grunt and the hold slackened. Clawing the remaining distance, I hauled myself over the crest. The vista that unfolded stole my breath. A sprawling valley cradling a city, unmistakably modern, its structures and roadways shimmering, the faint hum of traffic drifting up. It had been there all along, just beyond the ridge. A hysterical laugh threatened, but died stillborn as I turned. My pursuers were cresting the rise behind me. They wore the faces of the villagers, yet hideously altered. Skin stretched parchment thin and pale over sharp angles, mouths split wider, revealing rows of needle-fine teeth. Their movements possessed a terrifying fluid beauty. Corbin stood foremost, the avuncular facade incinerated by an ancient, malevolent light blazing in his eyes. "Did you imagine, little mote of dust," he snarled, the sound abrasive, "that you could simply wander away, that we would permit our sanctuary to be whispered of in your fleeting world?" What are you?" The words were a strangled rasp. His laughter scraped like boulders shifting. "We are the first children, the deep dwellers. These woods were ours before your kind raised their brittle cities and knelt to fleeting gods. We keep our counsel largely, but now and then..." His gaze swept over me, nakedly possessive. "Now and then, replenishment is required." They advanced, fanning into a closing semicircle. I retreated, the rough stone of the cliff edge biting into my heels, pebbles dislodged, spiraling down into the forested depths. "Two paths lie before you," Corbin stated, his tone softening into something almost seductive. "Return with us, join the fold, become eternal, or..." He gestured implicitly toward the precipice behind me. Time dilated. My gaze flickered between the monstrous figures arrayed before me, the vertiginous drop and the distant, unattainable city. Closing my eyes, drawing one deep, shuddering breath, I chose. I launched myself outward. Wind screamed past, the world a dizzying gyre of sky, trees, and the rapidly approaching earth. Fleeting glimpses registered, the snarling faces receding above, the canopy rushing upward. Howls of fury and frustration echoed from the clifftop. No profound revelations illuminated those final seconds. No life flashing past. Only the stark, primal thought: "This will rend me." I smashed through layers of foliage, branches tearing, snapping, slowing my descent in a brutal embrace. Then, abrupt cessation. I lay stunned, convinced of my demise, until a symphony of agony surged through every nerve ending. Alive, impossibly, miraculously alive. For long moments I remained inert, fearing movement would reveal catastrophic injury. Eventually, tentatively, I sat up, bruised, lacerated, battered, but seemingly intact. Looking upward, the cliff face seemed less towering than in my terror, its height mitigated by the saving grace of dense branches and yielding undergrowth. Of Corbin and his kin, there was no sign. Perhaps their domain ended at the ridge. Perhaps they believed the fall sufficient. Regardless, I wouldn't linger. Each motion was a trial, yet I forced myself upright and began the agonizing trek east toward the city, towards Sanctuary. Hours later, bruised and spectral, I stumbled onto asphalt. A passing driver, startled by my wild appearance, summoned aid. At the hospital, I offered the sanitized fiction, a hiker lost, a fall. They nodded with practiced sympathy, seeing only another unprepared tourist humbled by the wilderness. The full truth remained locked away. Who would credit tales of timeless enclaves and fanged woods dwellers? Sometimes doubt whispers. Perhaps isolation and trauma birthed a potent hallucination. But on quiet nights when the wind breathes secrets through the branches, the memory surfaces sharp and undulled. The village out of time, the eyes that watched with predatory patience, the chasm's edge, and the chilling certainty that deep within the shadowed folds of the wild, they endure, they wait, they hunger. Havenwood greeted me not with sound, but with its profound absence. A stillness so complete it felt less like quiet and more like a vacuum where birdsong, the sigh of wind, even the distant thrum of civilization had ceased to exist. This place, Havenwood, I hadn't sought it. Rather, it materialized before me after my GPS surrendered ghosts, miles back on a trail that had thoroughly betrayed my confidence. Down its deserted thoroughfare I dragged myself, agony radiating from a twisted ankle, possessed by the unnerving certainty of trespassing in a realm meant to remain unseen. The day had dawned bright with ambition, the promise of a newly discovered path, lauded online for panoramic vistas and manageable gradients, pulling me solo into the wilderness. Yet 3 hours deep, the terrain mocked the website's cheerful assessment. Steep inclines bled into treacherous scree. My water vanished with alarming speed. Then gravity asserted itself. A loose stone, a moment's imbalance, and I was cartwheeling down an embankment, my ankle screaming in protest as it buckled beneath me. Arrested finally, breathless and disoriented, the world spun. No signal bars graced my phone. The map app remained stubbornly inert. With the sun bleeding towards the horizon, panic began its cold crawl. Find shelter, find someone fast. Through the haze of pain, distant rooftops swam into view. A surge of desperate hope propelled me forward, each hobbled step a prayer towards what I assumed was sanctuary. Closer inspection, however, transmuted that hope into a chilling disquiet. Havenwood seemed caught in amber, its storefronts relics of a bygone era, perhaps the 1950s, displayed faded paint on unnervingly preserved facades. Automobiles littered the street at haphazard angles, silent testaments to interrupted journeys, their drivers seemingly evaporated, and over everything lay that crushing, unnatural hush. Hello? The word burst from my lips startlingly loud in the dead air. Is anyone there? I need assistance. Silence answered, not even the faintest reverberation. My voice seemed absorbed, nullified by the atmosphere itself. I limped towards a structure proclaiming itself a diner, a weak neon open sign pulsing fitfully against the encroaching twilight. A muffled clang from the bell above the door announced my entrance into a meticulous tableau of mid-century Americana. Crimson vinyl booths gleamed softly. A jukebox stood sentinel and mute in one corner. Yet the space was utterly devoid of life. "Hello?" I ventured again, voice hushed now, instinctively wary of disturbing the profound quiet. "Please, I'm injured. I just need to make a call." As my vision adapted to the dimness, a detail snagged my attention. Upon a table nearby, a meal sat half-consumed, its contents slowly congealing. Steam still curled delicately from the coffee mug beside it, as if the occupants had simply vanished mid-mouthful. Ice traced a path down my spine. Something was profoundly wrong here. I retreated from the diner, pulse hammering against my ribs. The street outside had shifted, shadows stretching like grasping fingers as the sun sank lower. It was then I saw it, a flicker of motion within a shop window opposite. A face, stark white and hollow-cheeked, observed me for a fleeting instant before vanishing behind a drawn curtain. "Wait!" I cried out, stumbling across the asphalt. "Please, I require aid!" My hand reached for the door handle, but it swung inward before I touched it. Standing there was an elderly woman. Her eyes were deep-set, her skin like aged parchment, yet an unsettling acuity in her gaze halted me. "You ought not to be here," she uttered, her voice a threadbare whisper. "It grows perilous when darkness falls." Before a response could form, her grip, surprisingly potent, clamped onto my arm. She pulled me inside, the door slamming shut with jarring finality. I found myself in what appeared to be a general store, its shelves burdened with dust-coated tins and artifacts of obsolete domesticity. "What is happening?" I managed, my voice trembling. "Where is everyone? I just need to contact someone. My ankle." "Hush," she commanded, a bony finger pressed urgently to her lips. They possess keen ears. "Who?" The question escaped as a frightened whisper, dread coiling tight within my stomach. The old woman peered through the window glass, her gaze darting nervously. "The others," she breathed, words laden with cryptic weight. "Those who claimed the rest. We mistook them for saviors initially. They arrived bearing promises, a life without end, a world without ailment. Oh, how readily we swallowed their words." I stared, grappling with the implications. I failed to comprehend. What others? What befell this town? She turned, her ancient eyes pools of sorrow and terror. 5 years passed, they materialized, strangers proffering a miraculous elixir. It halted age, they swore, banished sickness, and for a time it delivered. But then, her voice fractured, a shudder rippling through her frail form. People began altering, not merely ceasing to age but reversing, growing younger, terribly young, until they simply ceased to be. Infants one dawn vanished by the next, and those like myself who abstained. We few remain, concealed, waiting. Vertigo washed over me. Her narrative painted a scene too grotesque for belief. "But that's inconceivable," I stammered. "Such things do not occur." A dry, bitter laugh escaped her. "Ah, child, you grasp little of what is possible, but you must depart immediately before they perceive your presence." As if summoned, a low, resonant hum permeated the air. The old woman's eyes widened, stark terror blooming within them. "They approach," she whispered urgently. "Conceal yourself." She propelled me towards a rear chamber, but I resisted. Wait, I cannot abandon you. Accompany me. We can escape together. She shook her head, adamant. My time is past. I am too frail, too sluggish. I would only impede you. Go, now, and regardless of what transpires, do not permit them to apprehend you. Refuse any offering they make. Simply flee. The humming intensified, accompanied now by an unnatural, pulsing luminescence filtering through the shop windows. Against every instinct urging me to stay, I obeyed, hobbling with desperate speed towards the store's rear. A cramped storage space offered refuge. I squeezed inside, pulling the door almost closed. Through the narrow gap, I witnessed the shop suffuse with an ethereal cerulean glow. Voices arose inhuman, a discordant chorus of whispers overlapping in an unintelligible tongue. Breath held captive in my chest, I pressed myself flat against the cold back wall. The whispers drew nearer, shadows writhed just beyond my flimsy concealment. My heart thundered, a frantic drumbeat I felt certain they must detect. Then, abruptly, stillness returned. The light vanished. The hum died away. I remained frozen, scarcely daring to inhale, for an eternity measured in heartbeats. At last, unable to bear the suspense, I eased the door open and peered cautiously out. The shop stood empty. No trace remained of Clara, nor of the strange entities she described. I crept forth, ankles screaming with each tentative step, navigating back to the storefront. Outside, Havenwood lay unchanged, vacant, silent, suspended in time. Yet now I understood the horrifying reality concealed beneath its placid veneer. I didn't linger. Ignoring the throb in my ankle, I ran until Havenwood was a receding memory, until tarmac appeared beneath my feet and a passing truck's headlights offered salvation. The driver regarded my tale of Havenwood with blatant disbelief, yet kindly transported me to the nearest hospital. The events in that forsaken town remain unreported. Who would lend credence to such a story? There are moments I struggle to believe it myself, but sometimes late at night, when an unnatural quiet descends upon the world, Clara's warning echoes in my mind. I think of Havenwood's populace, of the terrible cost extracted for the illusion of eternal youth, and I know with a conviction that chills my very soul that certain corners of this earth are best left undisturbed, that some communities once entered may never truly be left behind. A disquiet settled deep in my bones the moment my worn leather boots met the groaning floorboards of that derelict farmhouse porch. The air itself felt stagnant, heavy against my skin, carrying the faint scent of decay. Out beyond the peeling paint, the wind sighed through the endless rows of corn, a dry, sibilant rustling that seemed woven into the very fabric of the place. I was a creature of pavement and noise, unfamiliar with this profound rural silence beyond fleeting weekend escapes. Yet this land, this isolation, was now mine. A dubious inheritance from a father drawn to the city's hum. Initially, the notion of disconnection held a certain appeal. Then my gaze fell upon the sentinel in the corn. It stood solitary amidst the whispering stalks, a figure of unnerving stillness. Its burlap head drooped, angled just so, but the eyes, they were like dark river stones, slick and depthless. Even under the muted afternoon sun, they possessed a disturbing gleam, catching the light in a way that lent them a cold, internal fire. A knot tightened low in my belly, a primal unease I tried to dismiss as city nerves. Dragging my canvas duffel inside, I stepped into a living room thick with the musk of generations past. Particles of dust drifted lazily through the slanted light, illuminating furniture that seemed weary, worn smooth by time and neglect. I wrestled open a pair of grimy windows, inviting a breeze that did little to dispel the accumulated stillness. Dropping my bag onto a threadbare armchair, its springs protesting faintly, I retreated outside, compelled to survey my inheritance more closely. The corn stood tall, a dense wall brushing my shoulders, the earth beneath it cracked and thirsty. To the left slumped an old barn, its red paint flaking like sunburnt skin. And there, dead center in the field, presided the Scarecrow. Tattered shirt, baggy trousers stuffed with straw, arms outstretched in a perpetual silent welcome or warning. Its hat, a battered felt thing, was split and stained, revealing patches of the coarse stuffing beneath. But again, it was the eyes that held me captive. Not buttons, not painted voids, but polished, glassy orbs that seemed to absorb the world and reflect back something else. I circled the house, seeking the small generator tucked away near the back wall. Glancing back from this new vantage, the Scarecrow's head appeared differently aligned, no longer seeming to fixate on me. Just nerves, I reasoned, the solitude already playing tricks. The generator sputtered, coughed on stale fuel, then roared reluctantly to life, the brief mechanical intrusion echoing across the quiet acreage before being swallowed once more by the corn's dry murmur. Leaning against the weathered siding, I let my gaze drift back to the field. The figure remained unmoving. Nightfall arrived not with comfort, but with a deepening sense of exposure. Exhausted from rudimentary cleaning and unpacking, I extinguished the living room lamp and peered through the window pane. Moonlight bathed the corn in an ethereal, silvery glow. Above the rustling tassels, I could discern the dark shape of the Scarecrow's head. Its eyes, catching the lunar radiance, shone like twin droplets of mercury. I watched, transfixed, a strange pressure building in my chest, my breath catching. It's just straw, I told myself fiercely, rags and straw on a stick. Forcing my gaze away, I retreated towards the promise of sleep. But rest proved elusive. The wind, no longer a simple sigh, seemed to caress the windowsill with whispering intent. My straining ears caught phantom sounds, the crunch of footsteps on the parched earth outside. Once I bolted upright in bed, convinced I'd heard a distinct snap, like a twig breaking directly beneath my window. Silence followed, thick and absolute, broken only by the frantic drumming in my ears, my mouth dry as dust. A branch, I rationalized, or an animal. Eventually, sheer exhaustion claimed me. Morning found me on the porch, nursing a mug of bitter instant coffee. My eyes instinctively sought the cornfield. The Scarecrow's arms maintained their rigid pose, yet its torso, had it shifted? A subtle rotation, perhaps only a few degrees, but enough to make my stomach clench. The breeze was gentle, insufficient to budge a figure impaled on such a sturdy wooden post. Taking a steadying breath, I resolved to investigate. Reaching the effigy, wading through the close-packed stalks, I noticed markings disturbing the soil at its base. Strange, deliberate patterns, spirals contained within circles intersected, by sharp, erratic lines. Kneeling, I touched a groove. The earth here felt oddly damp, freshly turned. A faint, earthy, almost metallic odor prickled my nostrils. I straightened, meeting the scarecrow's gaze. The head, crude burlap, held eyes that were undeniably smooth, cold stones. I tapped one gingerly with a fingertip. It felt like ice reflecting my own distorted face back at me. A shiver traced its way down my spine. I scanned the perimeter, expecting, what? Another presence? Nothing. Only the endless corn swaying hypnotically. The ensuing days were a blur of forced activity. I mended a loose floorboard, inspected the roof shingles, anything to occupy my hands and mind. Yet, the scarecrow remained a persistent flicker at the edge of my awareness. Each glance from a window sent a small, cold jolt through me. It was burrowing under my skin. On the third night, after darkness had fully claimed the landscape, another look confirmed my fear. The scarecrow had turned more definitively towards the house. There was no ambiguity now. Its torso was angled directly at my dwelling, those glassy eyes capturing the moonlight, sending fractured glints towards my window. I locked the door, drew the curtains tight, my heart hammering against my ribs. Huddled on the couch beneath a thin blanket, I listened. The wind moaned, the old house creaked and settled, and then footsteps. Slow, deliberate crunching across the yard. Not the house settling, not the wind. The sound of weight on dry earth, measured and stealthy. I lay frozen, breath held captive in my lungs, the frantic pulse in my ears deafening. Sweat beaded on my palms. The urge to peer through the curtains warred with a paralyzing dread. After an eternity, the steps receded, fading towards the corn. Then came a new sound, the rustle of stalks being pushed aside, a heavy passage through the dense growth. I awoke on the couch, stiff and unrested, greeting the dawn with trepidation. Circling the house, I searched for tracks, finding none distinct enough to be human footprints. But near the cornfield's edge, more symbols scarred the dirt, larger this time, bolder, as if gouged with a stick or some crude implement. Crouching, I traced a spiral, its edges sharp, undeniably fresh. The morning air felt chill, raising gooseflesh on my arms despite the sweat filming my skin. Looking up, the scarecrow seemed to lean forward slightly on its post. I backed away instinctively. Enough. It had to go. Retrieving a claw hammer from the barn's dusty interior, I marched back into the corn, the air growing strangely thick and quiet around me. The usual chorus of birdsong was absent, replaced solely by the whispering corn. Reaching the figure, I gripped the rough wood of the post and pulled. It didn't yield. Bracing my foot against the base, I heaved with all my strength. It felt anchored, rooted deep into something unyielding. I swung the hammer against the post's base, the impacts ringing strangely flat, splintering little. It was like striking stone. Exertion pounded in my temples, my vision blurring slightly at the edges. After several minutes of fruitless struggle, I surrendered, gasping for breath. Looking up into that burlap face, the stone eyes seemed to mock my efforts. The pressure in my chest returned, sharp and insistent. I fled the cornfield, stumbling back to the barn, leaving the hammer on a workbench with trembling hands. That evening, under a brilliant, watchful moon, I sat sentinel on the porch, flashlight clutched in a white-knuckled grip, my leg jiggling with nervous energy. Every few minutes I swept the beam across the yard, probing the shadows. Around midnight, the rustling resumed in the corn. Louder now, more purposeful, like something substantial moving with steady intent. I aimed the flashlight towards the sound, its beam swallowed by the dense rose. My breathing grew shallow, ragged. A primal urge to bolt inside screamed within me, but I held my ground, rooted by a morbid curiosity. Then a flicker of movement deep within the stalks, a shadow detaching itself, gliding between the rows, the faint crunch of earth, the snap of dry leaves. Goosebumps erupted across my skin. Holding my breath, I watched, waited. The movement ceased. Clicking off the flashlight, I scrambled backward into the house, the deadbolt sliding home with a decisive thunk. The following morning revealed the scarecrow canted forward at an alarming angle, seemingly poised to topple from its perch. Yet it held fast, and the symbols encircling its base were back, forming a complete unbroken ring, the lines carved deep, the edges raw. I circled it slowly, the familiar tightness gripping my chest, my mouth parched, hands unsteady. A certainty settled upon me, cold and unwelcome. Something ancient and bound resided in this spot. The feeling defied logic, yet resonated with chilling conviction. I retreated and managed to get a weak signal to call Leo, a friend from a town nearby. Describing the scarecrow, the movements, the symbols, earned me only skeptical laughter. Exhaustion, he suggested. Solitude playing tricks. He promised, condescendingly, to drive over on the weekend, help me yank the spooky decoration out. The offer provided a sliver of relief, a date to anchor my fraying sanity. But the nights grew longer, more terrifying. Footsteps became a regular occurrence, sometimes seeming to circle the entire house. Once, I awoke to the faint but distinct sound of the front doorknob rattling, a gentle, persistent turning. I stood frozen in the hallway, clad only in sleep clothes, fists clenched, heart threatening to batter its way out of my chest. The rattling stopped abruptly. Silence rushed back in, amplifying my terror. The day Leo was due arrived bright and empty. I watched the dusty driveway for hours, but his car never appeared. My calls went straight to voicemail, the signal dissolving into static. By mid-afternoon, a grim resolve propelled me back towards the cornfield. The scarecrow now leaned so far forward, its face was aimed squarely at the house, those eyes reflecting the pale daylight with unnerving intensity. The ring of symbols looked deeper, freshly etched. I kicked at one of the patterns, trying to obliterate it, but my foot skidded on the loose soil, nearly sending me sprawling. My breath hitched, a strange tingling numbness spreading through my arms. The impulse to flee warred with a stubborn, perhaps foolish, need to understand. That night, I dragged a chair to the living room window, positioning it for a clear view of the field. I doused all the lights. The moon, swollen and luminous, bleached the cornfield silver. The scarecrow held its pose, the precarious forward lean, the arms stiffly spread. I sat, weary but vigilant, waiting. Sometime after midnight, movement flickered at the scarecrow's base, a dark shape low to the ground, circling the post. I strained my eyes, heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. A faint scraping sound reached me, metal on wood perhaps. Then a low grunt, or maybe a hiss, carried on the night air. My limbs felt leaden, my mind racing in panicked circles. I couldn't look away. Suddenly, the scarecrow itself shifted. A violent jerk backward, then a sharp tilt, as if shoved or pulled by an unseen force. A curse escaped my lips, barely a whisper. Scrambling, my legs protesting, I lunged for a nearby lamp, flicking the switch. Light flooded the room, momentarily blinding me to the scene outside. A frantic rustling erupted from the corn, then silence descended once more. When my vision cleared, the scarecrow appeared unchanged, except was its torso twisted slightly more than before? A wave of nausea washed over me. I paced the confines of the small living room, the thought of calling the sheriff surfacing, only to be dismissed. What could I possibly report? A restless scarecrow? Before the first hint of dawn painted the sky, I was outside, armed with a shovel and a length of sturdy rope. Waiting was no longer an option. I plunged into the corn, the damp, cool air sharp in my lungs, my own breath pluming visibly. Anxiety churned in my gut. Reaching the figure, I jammed the shovel blade into the earth around the post, leveraging it back and forth, trying to break the seal. My arms screamed with the strain. Minutes stretched into an eternity of grunting effort. Then a satisfying crack. The post shifted. Quickly, I looped the rope around the scarecrow's midsection and pulled, throwing all my weight into it. Muscles shrieked in protest. The post wobbled, resisted, then finally surrendered, tearing free from its earthen socket with a shower of crumbling dirt. Clinging to the bottom of the wood was a dark, viscous residue, glistening wetly like fresh tar. My vision swam for a second, a sharp pain lancing through my skull. Ignoring it, I dragged the heavy effigy out of the circle of symbols, across the field, maneuvering it towards a patch of bare ground behind the barn. I dropped it there, its limbs splaying awkwardly, the stone eyes staring blankly up at the lightening sky. Stepping back, gasping for breath, I rubbed my aching temples, feeling profoundly shaky. What now? I didn't know, only that it had to be kept away from that spot, that cursed patch of earth in the heart of the corn. As the sun fully crested the horizon, I trudged back to the house, the burning ache in my shoulders and hands, a dull counterpoint to my churning thoughts. My plan was simple. Load the thing into my truck, drive it miles away, dump it where it could never find its way back. But when I returned to the spot behind the barn, shovel in hand, it was gone. The rope lay coiled in the dirt where I'd left it. The ground bore scrape marks, indentations suggesting something heavy had been dragged away. Heart pounding, breathing ragged, sweat stinging my eyes, I scanned the area frantically. The corn rustled softly in the morning breeze, a sound that now felt laden with menace. No sign of the scarecrow. My thoughts scattered like frightened birds. Leave. Pack up and leave now. Yet an invisible tether held me fast, a refusal to abandon this place to its secret malignancy without understanding. I am still here, pacing the confines of the dusty farmhouse, drawn again and again to the windows. There is nothing behind the barn but disturbed earth. The cornfield stands silent, watchful, but I cannot tear my gaze away. I feel those cold, stone eyes upon me, waiting for the cloak of night. The silence stretches, taut and unnerving, broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing, the heavy thud of my heart. My hands tremble ceaselessly. Each creak of the old house sounds like a footstep. I am afraid to venture out, yet the waiting is its own form of torture. I stand by the window, scanning the endless rows of corn. waiting for a flicker of movement, waiting for the inevitable return of that unholy sentinel, gripped by the unshakable conviction that it watches me still from somewhere just out of sight, maintaining its silent, impossible vigil over this haunted land. The corroded halo of the Starlight Diner's sign sputtered, casting a bruised, intermittent glow onto the asphalt ribbon, vanishing into prairie darkness. My rag traced lazy circles on the Formica countertop, a familiar ritual in the deep hours, when the bell above the door jangled sharp and sudden. I looked up, the practiced welcome dying on my lips. His eyes met mine across the empty space, and something primitive, cold and sharp, pierced the weary calm. This wasn't just another traveler seeking coffee against the void. 6 months I'd haunted this graveyard shift at the Starlight, this island of fluorescence adrift in nowhere, a necessary purgatory funding the final stretch of my studies. Nights typically unfolded in a quiet rhythm, the rumble of a big rig pulling in, the hushed confessions of local insomniacs over lukewarm mugs. But tonight, the air itself felt different, thin and taut, humming with an unseen charge. The man who'd entered was a study in deliberate anonymity, medium build, clothes the color of dust, a face designed to slide from memory, except for the eyes. They were like chips of slate, cold and unnervingly still, cataloging the worn booths, the humming coolers, lingering on me with an intensity that felt like a physical touch. Evening, I managed, my voice a thinner version of itself. Take a seat wherever suits, be right with you. He offered a slight inclination of his head, the ghost of a smile etching itself onto his lips as he slid into a booth tucked deep in the shadows. I gripped the coffee pot, its warmth a small anchor, retrieved a menu, and walked towards him, my own footsteps sounding too loud in the stillness. Coffee? I asked, the dark liquid already streaming into the thick ceramic mug before he answered. Yes, he murmured, the sound low, resonant, and the house special. His gaze was a palpable weight as I scribbled on my notepad. Turning away, I felt his voice snag me. Slow night. I paused, pivoted back, arranging my features into nonchalance. Usually is, this time. He nodded, a slow, measured movement, his eyes unwavering. Must feel isolated out here alone. A tremor ran beneath my skin, but I manufactured a light laugh. Oh, you get used to it. Excuse me, got to get this order back. I retreated to the relative safety of the kitchen, passed through, my heart thudding against my ribs like a trapped bird. Through the rectangular opening, I saw him, watching, that unnerving half-smile fixed in place. I relayed the order to Sal, the night cook, trying to keep the tremble from my voice. Everything copacetic out there, Alara? Sal asked, his weathered face creased with a familiar kindness. I hesitated, then forced a nod. Yeah, just a quiet customer, all good. But it wasn't. Time stretched, elastic and strange. When I delivered his food, he barely acknowledged it, his attention fixed on me. His questions began, softly probing. Where did I grow up? Any family close by? What hour did my shift finally end? Each inquiry landed like a small stone, sending ripples of disquiet through me. The clock above the counter dragged its hands. He nursed the same cup of coffee, showing no inclination to leave. The diner remained our silent stage, the only sounds the low thrum of the jukebox spitting out old melodies and the periodic tink of his spoon against ceramic. Every stolen glance confirmed it. He was watching, always watching, that cold, knowing smile unwavering. As the first pale streaks of dawn began to stain the eastern horizon, a knot of dread tightened in my stomach. I couldn't endure it longer. Squaring my shoulders, I approached his booth. My voice scraped thin but level. "Sir, apologies, but we need to close down this section for morning prep. I'll have to ask you to settle up." He leaned back, stretching with unnerving languor. "Now, Elara, we both know this establishment keeps its doors open round the clock. Why the sudden urge to evict me?" Ice flooded my veins. My name. I hadn't offered it. How do you know my name?" The question came out sharper, louder than intended. A low chuckle, devoid of warmth, escaped him. "Oh, I know quite a bit about you, Elara. Been observing you for a while now." Panic flared, hot and blinding. I spun, intending to flee, to scream for Sal, anything. But he moved with startling speed. His hand clamped around my wrist, fingers digging into bone with bruising strength. "Sit," he commanded, his voice stripped of its earlier smoothness, now hard, unforgiving. "We have unfinished business." I strained against his grip, a vice of iron. "Let go!" I hissed, eyes darting wildly, searching for a weapon, an escape. I said, "Sit," he repeated, yanking me inexorably towards the vinyl bench. Suddenly, the bell above the door exploded with sound. Both our heads snapped towards the entrance as a boisterous cluster of truckers spilled inside, their laughter and loud greetings shattering the suffocating tension. His grip faltered a microsecond of distraction, but it was enough. I ripped my arm free, stumbling backward, then bolted towards the swinging kitchen doors. "Sal!" I shrieked, bursting through. "Call 911 now!" Sal spun from the sizzling grill, his eyes widening at my terror. He lunged for the wall phone, but the kitchen doors slammed open again. The man stood framed in the doorway, his features twisted into a mask of fury. "That was unwise, Elara," he snarled, taking a step towards us. Sal, bless his grizzled heart, reacted instantly. He snatched the heavy cast-iron skillet from the burner, swinging it in a wide, desperate arc. Metal met skull with a horrifying wet thwack. The man crumpled, hitting the linoleum floor like a felled tree. The ensuing hours dissolved into a disorienting montage. The wail of sirens bleeding into the pre-dawn quiet, the dispassionate inquiries of uniformed officers, the stark flash of cameras turning the familiar diner into an alien landscape. A paramedic gently checked my pulse while a detective stood nearby, his expression somber. "You were incredibly fortunate," he stated, his voice low. "We've had this individual on our radar for months, linked to assaults, disappearances, women working isolated, late shifts." I could only nod, numb, the chilling reality of my near fate slowly seeping in. "You did well," the detective added, his tone softening fractionally. "Listened to that gut feeling. It likely saved your life." As they escorted the man, now cuffed and slumped towards a waiting car, his eyes found mine one last time. The predatory calculation was gone, replaced by impotent rage. I held his stare, refusing to break contact. I had faced the monster under the bed, the shadow in the alley, and somehow I was still standing. Sunlight, clean and sharp, sliced through the diner windows by the time they let me leave. Stepping outside, the morning air felt impossibly fresh against my skin. The adrenaline began its slow retreat, leaving an aching exhaustion in its wake. Sal emerged behind me, looking drained. "You all right, kid?" The concern in his voice was genuine. A shaky smile touched my lips. "I will be. Thanks, Sal. Back there, you saved me." He gave an embarrassed shrug. "Anyone would've. Hey, take a couple days, seriously. I got your shifts covered." I started to argue out of habit, but the night's weight crashed down. Tears welled, hot and sudden, blurring the familiar lines of the starlight. I sobbed, raw and uncontained, while Sal awkwardly patted my shoulder. When the storm passed, I looked back at the diner, the place that had been my refuge. My mundane necessity now felt violated. Yet, as the first regulars began to appear, peering curiously at the lingering police cruiser, but heading determinedly for their morning coffee, a flicker of defiance sparked within me. This was my ground, my shift, my life. "Actually, Sal," I said, my voice clearer now, my shoulders straightening. "I think I'll be back tomorrow night. This place, it's mine, in a way. I'm not letting him scare me away from it." Sal's face broke into a grin, relief warring with pride. "Atta girl, but take today, get some sleep. We'll hold down the fort." Walking towards my car, the night replayed. The creeping dread, the paralysis of fear, the jarring violence, the strange, hollow triumph. The memory would be a ghost at my shoulder for a long time, I knew. But I also knew a new awareness had settled within me, a sharpened edge. I started the engine, glancing back at the diner. The neon sign still stuttered, but its light no longer felt lonely or ominous. It felt like a testament, a reminder that even when darkness presses in, a light persists, sometimes fiercely from within. Driving into the rising sun, its warmth a balm on my face, I made a silent promise. Never again would I dismiss the whisper of instinct, the prickle of unease. I had looked into the abyss and hadn't blinked. Whatever waited down the road, I could face it. The night had been a crucible, terrifying and long, but I had emerged changed, forged stronger, and that strength was mine to keep, a quiet certainty humming just beneath my skin. The diner, the graveyard shift, they weren't just a job anymore. They were proof, and I carried that proof forward into the bright, uncertain day. The wipers smeared sheets of water across the glass, a frantic, inadequate rhythm against the deluge. Through the distorted world, I strained my eyes, hunting for a flicker of light, a signpost, anything beyond the oppressive curtain of rain. Then, abruptly, a shape materialized at the road's edge. Stark, solitary, thumb angled skyward. A synapse fired, a choice made in the churning fatigue and isolation. A choice whose echo would reverberate through all the nights to come. I guided the car onto the sodden verge. "My name is Ilara. What follows is the anatomy of a nightmare. birthed from a single act of misplaced compassion, a story that still unravels me in the quiet hours. The day had stretched thin, bled dry by a conference 3 states distant. Now this tempest clawed at my journey home, reducing progress to a sluggish crawl. Weariness was a physical weight, frustration a bitter taste. The simple solace of my own bed felt worlds away. Seeing him there, drenched and immobile, pricked at some vestige of conscience. A brutal night to be stranded. A tremor ran through me as I eased the car to a halt. The engine's thrum suddenly loud in the downpour. He approached, a lanky silhouette unfolding from the gloom. Rain plastered strands of umber hair to his brow. As the passenger door swung open, a strange miasma invaded the car's dry sanctuary. Damp earth, wet wool, underscored by an acrid chemical tang. Obliged, he offered. The smile he produced a fleeting, shallow thing that failed to ignite his eyes. Thought I might be rooted here till dawn. No trouble, I managed, aiming for nonchalance, my voice tighter than intended. Destination? Just a little further, he answered, his gesture vague, encompassing the rain-lashed darkness ahead. I'll signal when. Merging back onto the slick asphalt, my gaze flickered towards my passenger, younger than my first impression, perhaps late 20s. His clothes, though worn, seemed cared for, yet an unnerving intensity radiated from him, a coiled stillness that set my teeth on edge. Silence descended, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the wiper's hypnotic sweep and the percussive drumming of rain on the metal roof. Then his voice, low and disturbingly resonant, broke the quiet. So, Ilara, the conference yield anything useful? The car lurched as my hands spasmed on the wheel. How do you know my name? The conference? A chuckle, dry and rustling, scraped against my nerves. Oh, I'm familiar with quite a bit, Ilara. 1542 Elm Street, isn't it? Golden retriever named Jasper, and the salient point really. One oughtn't invite shadows into their car on nights like these. My thoughts scattered like startled birds. Impossible. This man was an utter stranger, wasn't he? Who are you? The demand emerged thin, frayed with nascent panic. He pivoted in his seat, and the look in his eyes extinguished the last vestiges of warmth in the small space. It was hunger, ancient and predatory. You don't recognize me, Ilara. That stings. We've crossed paths. Numerous times, actually. Your attention was elsewhere. Fractured images surfaced, a fleeting glimpse of his profile near the checkout line, a figure loitering across from my office building, a man walking a dog disturbingly similar to Jasper in the park periphery. How had these moments registered so subliminally, yet never coalesced into recognition? What is it you want? I fought to anchor my voice. Less about my wants, Ilara, more about yours. Those subterranean currents you pretend don't exist. You're suffocating in the predictability, aren't you? Yearning for texture, a jolt. That's the real reason you stopped tonight. A coded invitation to chaos. His words struck a dissonant chord, unsettlingly accurate. A restlessness had indeed been stirring within me, a dissatisfaction with the smooth, sterile surfaces of my existence. But this was derangement. You're mistaken, I asserted, the forcefulness hollow. I stopped out of basic decency. The rain, His laugh returned, seeming to expand, pressing against the windows. Ah, Elara, the perennial altruist, always polishing the halo. But that narrative doesn't quite cover the truth, does it? My knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. I want you out of my car, right now. Regrettably, that's not feasible, he murmured, a new serrated edge honing his tone. Our engagement isn't concluded. Far from it. Raw panic surged. Escape. I needed distance, lights, people. My foot crushed the accelerator, the engine whining in protest as the car leaped forward. My eyes scanned desperately for an exit, a side road, any sign of sanctuary. A futile gesture, Elara, he stated, his calm a chilling counterpoint to my terror. There's nowhere else, just this ribbon of road and us. He was right. The highway stretched into an infinite, lightless void. A horrifying realization dawned. I had no sense of location, no idea how long we'd been driving. Time felt elastic, distorted. Hours might have slipped by unnoticed. What have you done? The question was barely a breath. Nothing you didn't permit, came the soft reply. You unlocked the door, Elara. You let me cross the threshold. As if summoned, the engine coughed, sputtered, and died. Inertia carried us to a silent halt on the shoulder, enveloped by an absolute blackness. I twisted the key. The ignition offered only a dead click. Impeccable timing, the man observed, that disquieting smile resurfacing. Shall we adjourn our discussion to the elements? I'm not going anywhere with you, I choked out, the bravado paper thin. He sighed, a performance of mild exasperation. Elara, Elara, when will you grasp the fundamentals? Choice isn't on the table, it never was. His hand reached across the console. I flinched away, scrabbling at the door handle, but it remained stubbornly fixed, sealed. Don't resist, he whispered. It flows smoother if you don't. His fingers closed around my forearm, and a dizzying vertigo washed through me. The world outside the windows began to melt, colors bleeding, shapes dissolving into abstraction. His voice seemed to recede, echoing down a long tunnel, the last coherent sound I registered. Welcome to the narrative you craved, Elara. Try to enjoy the journey. Consciousness returned reluctantly, finding me in my own bed, sunlight shafting through the blinds. Disorientation clung like mist. A dream? A vivid, terrifying nightmare? Then, as I pushed myself upright, my gaze fell upon the nightstand. My heart seized. A small square of paper rested there. Scrawled upon it in unfamiliar, spiky handwriting were 5 words. Thanks for the lift. See you soon. In the ensuing weeks, I clung to rational explanations. Stress, exhaustion, a waking dream state. Yet the unshakable conviction remained that some fundamental axis of my reality had shifted. His presence became a peripheral haunting, a fleeting movement at the edge of sight, a shadow detaching itself from other shadows. When I'd whip my head around, there was nothing. Locks were changed, security systems installed, a new apartment leased in a different part of town. Futile gestures, he was an ambient pressure, a constant, unseen observer. And the most insidious truth? A treacherous sliver of my psyche thrilled to it. The peril, the enigma, it resonated with a dormant frequency within me. Now, setting this down, the boundary between the real and the unreal feels porous, unstable. Am I fracturing from within? Or did I truly, on that rain-drenched highway, extend an invitation to something that dwells in the spaces between worlds? Certainty is a luxury I no longer possess. Every unfamiliar face holds his potential. Every secured door feels permeable to his influence. Consider this, then, a warning etched in sleeplessness. Should you find yourself on a desolate road under a weeping sky, confronted by a figure seeking passage, keep driving. Keep driving as if your soul depends on it. Because the things you welcome into the small, contained world of your car might just decide to stay. And once invited, some guests never truly depart.